They had already decided who she was before she ever opened her mouth. The morning sun hung high over Red Hollow, baking the dust into a pale crust that cracked under every boot step, and the wind carried the dry smell of hay and leather through a town that believed it knew everything about everyone. Clara Whitmore walked down Main Street with a folded paper in her hand, stopping at every door that had a small sign hanging in the window. Help wanted. 3 simple words. 3 chances at starting over. She pushed open the door to the general store first, the bell above it giving a tired little ring as if even it expected disappointment. The owner barely looked up before his eyes hardened in recognition. His answer came before her question. Positions filled. Clara nodded once, polite, like she had expected nothing else, and stepped back into the sunlight. Next was the bakery. The smell of fresh bread drifted onto the street, warm and sweet, the kind of smell that made people think life was simple. The woman behind the counter listened a little longer, almost kind, until someone whispered something in her ear. That was all it took. Her smile faded like a cloud passing over the sun. We don't need help anymore. Clara thanked her anyway. Always thank them. By noon she had walked nearly a mile up and down that same stretch of wooden sidewalks, her boots leaving faint prints in the powdery dirt, her shadow shrinking beneath her as the heat climbed past 90 degrees. At the blacksmith shop a man didn't even let her finish speaking. At the hotel they pretended not to hear her. Outside the saloon, 2 men leaning against the rail went quiet as she approached. One of them muttered just loud enough. That's her. The other nodded slowly. Jail girl. Clara kept walking. No argument. No defense. Just quiet steps measured in inches and seconds. If she heard the word again, she gave no sign. In her right hand, she carried a small leather strap, wrapped twice around her wrist. At the end of it hung a silver locket no bigger than a $50 coin. Worn smooth. Opened so many times the hinge had turned soft. Once, as she paused near the water trough for horses, she opened it just a fraction with her thumb. Inside was the faded picture of a young boy, maybe 8 years old, his smile crooked, his hair sticking up like he had run through the wind. She looked at it for exactly 3 seconds, then closed it again. Down the street, a tall rancher sat quietly on a hitching rail outside the feed store, hat low, sleeves rolled, saying nothing as he watched the same pattern repeat itself. Refusal. Silence. Doors closing before conversations began. He didn't move, didn't interrupt, just listened to what people said when they thought no one important was listening. By late afternoon, the help wanted signs were still hanging, but Clara Whitmore had run out of doors to knock on. She stopped at the edge of town where the road turned to open prairie, the horizon stretching wide and empty for miles, the kind of space where a person either disappeared or started over. Behind her, Red Hollow returned to its business like she had never walked through it at all. And for a long moment, she just stood there, holding that small silver locket, as if the only proof she existed was the weight of it in her hand. The wind shifted an hour before sunset, carrying the low sound of cattle from somewhere beyond the hills and rattling the loose board on the empty stable where Clara would spend the night. And as the golden light stretched across the town like a quiet warning, the whispers started again, softer now, but sharper, like dry grass brushing against itself before a fire that never came. People did not say her name when she passed. They said things around it. Some mistakes follow you. Some folks do not change. Some pasts do not stay buried. Clara heard every word. She always did. But she kept the same steady pace, one step, then another, as if each foot of ground was something she had earned the hard way. Near the well, a young boy struggled to lift a wooden bucket almost too heavy for his arms. The rope twisted. The bucket tipped. Water spilled into the dust. Clara stepped forward without asking permission, caught the handle before it fell, and steadied it like it weighed nothing. The boy looked up, unsure, his freckles bright against sunburned cheeks. She did not smile wide, just enough to say it was all right. She handed the bucket back and walked on. Before anyone could say she was trying to be seen, from across the street, 2 women watched from behind a fabric curtain. One shook her head slowly. That is how they do it, she whispered. Act decent until you forget what they are. The other asked quietly, what did she really do? The answer came fast. Enough. No details. No proof. Just enough. The rancher was still there, though now he leaned against a post outside the supply store, arms folded, saying nothing, his eyes following not her face, but her choices. He saw how she never asked twice, never begged, never explained. Most people tried to outrun their reputation. She just walked through hers like weather. As the heat broke and the temperature dropped towards 70 degrees, Clara returned to the abandoned stable at the far edge of town. The boards were gray from years of sun. One hinge hung loose on the door. Inside, the smell of old straw and dry earth held the memory of better seasons. She set her small cloth bundle in the corner and sat on an overturned water trough. For a few minutes, she did nothing at all. Then she took out the silver locket again. This time she opened it fully. The boy in the picture seemed frozen in laughter, unaware of whatever storms had come after that moment. Clara traced the edge of the photo with a careful finger, like someone reading Braille. "You are probably taller now," she said quietly, her voice steady, almost warm. "I hope you are still brave." Outside, Boots approached on the dirt, slow, deliberate, stopping just short of the doorway. She did not turn. Not yet. The man at the door studied the scene without speaking. No complaints. No anger. No bitterness. Just a woman sitting in fading light, holding on to something small that clearly mattered more than anything she owned. After a long silence, he finally spoke, his voice calm and level like someone measuring more than words. "If a person did the right thing," he said, "and it cost them everything, would they do it again?" Clara closed the locket gently before answering. "If it kept someone else from losing everything," she said, "then yes. Every time." The man did not step inside the stable right away. He stayed just outside the doorway where the last light of day outlined his frame in quiet gold, his hat casting a long shadow that stretched across the dirt floor toward Clara's boots. He was not a young man, maybe somewhere past 35, with the kind of stillness that came from years of watching storms roll in without wasting words on them. His hands showed honest work. Sun-darkened skin, small scars from rope and wire. Nothing careless. Nothing cruel, just the marks of a man who earned his living one sunrise at a time. Clara stood slowly, not defensive, not nervous, just respectful of space. The evening air cooled another 5 degrees as the sun slipped lower, and somewhere in the distance a screen door slammed and a dog barked once before settling again. The rancher studied her for a long moment like a man deciding the weight of something unseen. "Name," he finally said. "Clara Whitmore," she answered without hesitation. No apology in her voice. No shame either. Just fact. He nodded once. "Ethan Cole." He did not say it like an introduction. More like a piece of information she might need later. His eyes moved to the small cloth bundle in the corner, then to the repaired tear in her sleeve, stitched by hand with careful, even thread. "You fix your own things," he said. Clara glanced down. "If you do not, they stay broken." That earned the smallest hint of approval. Not a smile, just the absence of doubt. He stepped inside then, boots quiet against the packed earth, and crouched near the loose hinge on the stable door. With one pull from a small tool in his pocket, he tightened the bent nail back into place. Not a grand gesture, just something practical. "Wind would have torn that off by morning," he said. Clara watched, but did not thank him right away. She understood the kind of man who did not fix things for praise. "You watch people before you talk to them," she said instead. Ethan gave a slight shrug. "People say more when they think nobody is asking." A pause settled between them, comfortable but heavy with meaning. Finally he asked, "Town says you have been locked up before." He did not soften the words. Clara did not look away. "Yes." No excuse followed. No story offered. Just truth placed on the table like a card. Ethan nodded again, as if honesty mattered more than the answer itself. "Town also says you are trouble." Clara considered that for a moment, then answered carefully. "Trouble usually depends on which side of it you are standing." That almost pulled a smile from him. Almost. Outside, the sky turned the deep orange that came just before night claimed the plains, and the smell of cooling dust drifted in through the open slats. Ethan rested his forearms on his knees and asked the question that most men would have started with. "Why did you not explain yourself today?" Clara looked down at the locket in her hand, turning it once between her fingers before answering. "Because people who want the truth ask for it." She met his eyes then, steady and direct. "You were the first one who did." The silence that followed felt different now. Not suspicion, not judgment, something closer to recognition. After a moment, Ethan stood and brushed the dust from his hands. "Sun comes up at 6, he said. I have a fence line 8 miles north that does not care what people say about you. It only cares if you can work. Clara did not answer right away. For the first time that day, something like cautious hope moved across her face, small and careful, like a candle being lit against the wind. Clara did not sleep much that night, not because the stable was cold, but because hope was a dangerous thing when you had learned how quickly it could disappear, and she had learned long ago that the difference between disappointment and survival was expecting nothing at all. Long after the town lamps went dark and the prairie turned silver under moonlight, she sat with her back against the wooden wall, listening to the quiet breathing of the night, the soft shifting of dry boards, the distant cry of a coyote somewhere beyond the open land. She woke before dawn without needing a clock, the way people do when they have spent too many mornings earning their place. The sky was still dark blue when she stepped outside, the air cool enough to raise a faint chill on her skin, maybe 55 degrees, the kind of morning that smelled like clean dust and distance. Ethan was already there, sitting tall on a broad chestnut horse, another saddled behind him without ceremony. He did not wave, did not ask if she had changed her mind. He simply handed her the reins like the decision had already been made. Clara checked the straps, adjusted the stirrup length by 1 notch, and mounted with the ease of someone who had done it many times before. Ethan noticed, said nothing. They rode out just as the first line of sunlight broke the horizon, turning the land into long shadows and pale gold. The ranch sat 8 miles north like he had said, spread across rolling ground marked by weathered fences and open pasture. No grand house, no show of wealth, just working land, the kind that answered only to effort. Ethan dismounted near a section of fallen fence where 3 posts leaned like tired men after a long day. He tossed Clara a pair of worn leather gloves. "Show me what you know," he said. "No instructions, no demonstration, just trust placed carefully." Clara walked the line slowly, touching the broken rail, testing the tension of the wire, studying the angle of the fallen posts. She did not rush, did not try to impress. After a minute she said, "These were set too shallow. Frost probably pushed them loose last winter." Ethan watched closely now. She measured distance with her eyes, paced 12 steps, then chose a new placement 3 feet deeper into firmer ground. When she lifted the post driver, she did not struggle with the weight. She worked steady, efficient, no wasted motion. The rhythm of iron against wood echoed across the quiet pasture. By the time the sun climbed higher, she had reset 4 posts and restrung the wire tight enough to hum when the wind touched it. Sweat darkened the collar of her shirt, but she never asked for a break. Around mid-morning, Ethan handed her a canteen. She drank once and handed it back. "Most people talk about what they can do," he said. Clara wiped dust from her hands. "Talking does not fix fences." That time he did smile, just barely. Later, as they walked toward the barn, a young ranch hand approached, maybe 19, uncertain in his step. He leaned close to Ethan and spoke low, but Clara still heard the words carried by the wind. "You know who she is, right?" Ethan did not lower his voice when he answered. "I know what she did today." The boy hesitated. "That is not what I meant." Ethan rested his hand on the fence Clara had just repaired. "It is what I meant." And just like that, without speeches or declarations, the first piece of her new life was set into the ground as firmly as the post she had driven into the prairie soil. By the 3rd morning, Clara no longer felt like a stranger on the land, though she still spoke little and asked for nothing beyond the work placed in front of her, and the ranch itself seemed to be measuring her the same way Ethan had, not by where she had been, but by what she did when nobody was watching. The days settled into a rhythm that belonged to effort. Wake before sunrise. Coffee strong enough to taste like burnt oak. Saddles creaking. Wind moving through tall grass like a slow river. Clara took the hardest tasks without reaching for them, as if she understood that trust was something earned in inches, not miles. When a young colt refused a bridle, she did not pull or force. She stood beside it, one quiet hand against its neck until the animal settled on its own. When a water trough cracked under the heat, she patched it with scrap tin and patience instead of complaint. Every action said the same thing without words. "I am still here." By the end of the week, even the skeptical ranch hands stopped watching her like a problem waiting to happen and started watching her like someone who might stay. Late one afternoon, clouds gathered low and gray across the western ridge, threatening one of those fast summer storms that could tear loose anything not properly secured. Ethan pointed toward the north pasture where loose boards rattled against a supply shed. "Storm will hit within the hour," he said. "Anything not tied down will not be there tomorrow." Clara nodded and moved before he finished speaking. Together they worked the line, securing tools, reinforcing a gate hinge, checking the feed covers. Thunder rolled once, distant but certain. As the first wind pushed across the fields, Clara noticed a section of roof tin lifting with each gust. Without asking, she climbed the side ladder, boots finding balance against the narrow rungs, one hand gripping the edge while the other hammered the nail back into place. The wind pulled at her shirt, but she did not rush. Careful work lasted longer. When she climbed down, dust streaked her sleeves, and her hands showed new blisters she did not mention. Ethan handed her a cloth rag. "Most people would have waited to be told," he said. Clara wiped her hands slowly. "Most people are waiting to be trusted." That answer stayed with him. That evening, as rain began to fall in steady lines across the pasture, they stood beneath the barn overhang, watching the storm settle the heat. For a long minute, neither spoke. Then Ethan asked the question he had been carrying since the first day. "You said people who want the truth ask for it. I am asking now. What happened back there?" Clara did not answer right away. Rain tapped against the roof like a slow drum. Finally, she said, "There was a boy, smaller than the one in my locket. He needed someone to stand between him and a bad choice made by someone bigger." Her voice remained even. No drama, no defense, just memory. "I stood there. That is all." Ethan studied her face. "And it cost you everything." Clara watched the rain hit the dirt. "It cost me what people thought of me." A pause. Then quietly, "That is cheaper than what it could have cost him." Ethan nodded once, not as a judge, but as a man who understood the math of character. Out in the rain, the fence she had set 3 days earlier held firm against the wind, straight and unshaken, exactly like the woman who had set it. The storm passed sometime after midnight, leaving the ranch washed clean and quiet under a pale morning sky, the kind of silence that came after hard weather had tested everything that claimed it could last. And Clara was already awake before the first rooster called, walking the fence line alone with a slow, steady pace, checking each post with her hand the same way a carpenter checks his own work, not for praise, but for truth. 8 miles of open land did not care about rumors. Wire either held or it did not. Posts either stood or they fell. That kind of honesty suited her. By the time the sun climbed over the eastern ridge, the temperature rising towards 75 degrees, Ethan found her resetting a loosened staple with the back of a hammer she must have borrowed without being told. He watched quietly for a moment before speaking. "Most people check their work once," he said. Clara did not stop. "Most failures happen after people stop checking." That answer stayed with him longer than he expected. Later that morning, a supply wagon rolled in from town, bringing grain sacks, lamp oil, and the usual collection of news that traveled faster than any horse. The driver climbed down slow, wiping sweat from his neck, his eyes drifting toward Clara with the same recognition she had seen 100 times before. He leaned closer to Ethan, voice low but not low enough. "You know the court up in Dry Creek still remembers her name." Ethan did not ask what name. He only asked one thing. "Do they remember why?" The driver hesitated. "Stories say she struck a man." Ethan nodded once. "Stories are often lazy." The driver shifted uncomfortable, then left it alone. Clara carried 2 50-pound grain sacks into the barn without being asked, her movements controlled, her breathing steady, never trying to prove anything, only finishing what needed finishing. By midday, the sun sat high and unforgiving, pushing the heat past 90 again, and the ranch hands gathered near the shade of the water tower for a short break. One of the older men, Thomas Grady, who had worked cattle longer than most had been alive, finally spoke what others had been thinking. "Girl," he said, not unkind, "why do you not defend yourself when folks talk?" Clara considered that while pouring water into a tin cup. Because people who need explanations usually already chose their answer. Thomas studied her a long moment, then gave a small approving nod. "Fair enough." That afternoon, Ethan handed her a small wooden box he had taken from the supply wagon. Inside was a new set of work gloves, thick leather, and used. Clara looked surprised for the first time since arriving. "These are not charity," Ethan said before she could refuse. "These are tools. Tools go to people who use them." She accepted them with a quiet thank you and nothing more. As the day settled toward evening, a rider appeared far down the road from town, a small figure against the long, flat horizon, moving with purpose toward the ranch like someone following a decision made days before. Clara did not notice him yet. She was repairing a loose gate hinge, her new gloves already marked with dust. Ethan saw the rider first, watched the approach, said nothing. Some truths, he knew, always found their way on horseback whether anyone was ready or not. The rider came into clearer view as the sun began its slow drop toward the western hills, his horse moving at a steady pace that spoke of long miles and a purpose that would not wait for tomorrow. And Ethan could tell from the way the man sat in the saddle that this was not someone passing through by accident. Clara was still working the gate hinge, tightening the last bolt with careful turns, when the sound of approaching hoofbeats finally reached her. She did not tense, did not step back. She simply finished the last turn before standing upright and brushing the dust from her gloves. The rider stopped about 20 feet away, removing his hat in a gesture that carried respect rather than authority. He looked no older than 40, dressed like a man who spent more time traveling than settling, his coat lined with the pale dust of 3 different counties. His eyes moved from Ethan to Clara, and something like relief crossed his face. "Miss Whitmore," he said carefully, as if confirming something important. Clara did not answer right away. She only watched him the way she had learned to watch everything, measuring tone before trusting words. "Yes," she said finally. The man nodded once, then reached slowly into his satchel, not in a threatening way, but in the careful manner of someone who knew that some objects carried more weight than they appeared to. He pulled out a folded paper, worn at the edges from travel. "Name is Samuel Reed," he said. "I came from Dry Creek." Clara's expression did not change, but her fingers tightened slightly against the leather of her gloves. Ethan remained silent, allowing the moment to belong to her. Samuel continued, his voice steady. "There was a hearing last month. New testimony. Someone finally spoke who should have spoken before." The wind moved softly through the pasture grass. No one interrupted. Samuel unfolded the paper and held it out, not forcing it into her hand, just offering it like a bridge she could choose to cross. "Your record was cleared," he said. "Judge called it a failure of courage from others. Said the truth just arrived late." Clara did not reach for the paper. Yet. Instead, she asked one question. "Why now?" Samuel gave a small, honest shrug. "Because the boy you protected turned 13. Said he was tired of being brave in private." That was the first time Ethan saw Clara lose her perfect control. Not with tears, not with shock. Just a small breath she had probably been holding for years finally released into the open air. She took the paper then, reading the words slowly, making sure they were real. Around them, the ranch hands had drifted closer without meaning to, drawn by the quiet gravity of something being set right. Thomas removed his hat. No one spoke. Samuel added one more thing. "Town council in Dry Creek asked me to say they were wrong." Clara folded the paper carefully, the same way she had folded hope before, gently, without trusting it too quickly. "Thank you for bringing it," she said. Samuel nodded. Some debts are not paid with money. When he rode away a few minutes later, the ranch felt different, like the air after rain. Ethan leaned against the fence beside Clara, not congratulating her, not making a speech, just standing there. After a while he said quietly, "Fence held through the storm." Clara looked out across the land she had helped mend. Good work usually does. And for the first time since she arrived, the past no longer seemed like something chasing her, but something finally walking behind. News did not travel slowly on the frontier. By the next morning the story had already reached Red Hollow, carried by the same supply wagon that once brought whispers and now returned with something far heavier than rumor. Truth. It arrived quietly, without celebration, without apology, just spoken in low voices between transactions, passed from one porch to another like a fact people wished they had known sooner. Clara did not go into town to hear it. She was already at work before sunrise, repairing a section of corral rail that had warped from the last storm, her movements steady and unchanged, as if nothing outside the ranch had shifted at all. Ethan noticed that. Most people would have walked straighter after being proven right. Clara worked exactly the same. That told him more than the letter ever could. Near mid-morning, Thomas approached with a slow, thoughtful step, carrying a small tin box. He set it on a post. beside her without ceremony. "Figured you might want this," he said. Inside was a set of measuring nails and a proper fencing gauge, tools usually passed only to hands that had earned their place. Clara looked at the box for a moment before closing the lid gently. "I will take care of them," she said. Thomas gave a small nod. "That is why they are yours." Later that day, Ethan had reason to ride into Red Hollow for supplies. He did not ask Clara to come. He did not need to. Some returns had to happen on their own time. When he stepped into the general store, the same owner who once refused Clara cleared his throat before speaking. "Heard about that situation," the man said, pretending to straighten a ledger. Ethan only asked one question. "Did it change what kind of worker she is?" The man hesitated. "No." Ethan nodded. "That is the only part that mattered." At the bakery, the woman who once turned Clara away wrapped his order with unusual care. "If she ever wants work here," she said softly, "there would be a place." Ethan adjusted his hat. "She already has one." No pride in his voice. Just fact. By the time he left town, something had shifted. People did not speak her name with suspicion anymore. They spoke it with the careful tone people use when they realized they were late to understanding something important. Back at the ranch, Clara was teaching the young ranch hand how to set a post straight without splitting the grain, showing him how to let the tool do the work instead of fighting it. Her voice remained calm, patient. The boy listened, not because she had been proven innocent, but because she knew what she was doing. As the afternoon cooled and long shadows stretched across the pasture, Clara finally took the folded court paper from her pocket and placed it inside the silver locket behind the photograph. Not displayed, not shown around, just placed where it belonged. Proof did not need an audience. Ethan noticed, but said nothing. Some victories were not meant to be announced. As the sun dropped low, turning the grasslands bronze, Thomas spoke quietly while watching Clara finish the last gate check. "Funny thing," he said. "Town thought they were deciding who she was." Ethan followed Clara with his eyes as she walked the fence she had built with her own hands. "They never were," he replied. And out across the open land, where only work spoke loud enough to matter, her reputation was no longer something she had to carry. It was something she had built. Autumn came slowly to the prairie, not with color at first, but with cooler mornings and longer shadows that stretched across the ranch like quiet reminders that time moved forward whether people were ready or not. And by then Clara Whitmore was no longer the new hand, no longer the woman people watched from a distance, but simply part of the rhythm of the place. Her work spoke before she did. Fences held. Horses settled under her calm hands. Tools went back exactly where they belonged. The kind of small things most people never noticed until they stopped happening. One late afternoon, as the temperature dropped to a comfortable 68 degrees and the sky turned the pale blue that only came after harvest season, a small wagon approached the ranch road. Not official, not important, just a simple farm cart pulled by a tired mule. A boy sat at the front, maybe 13 now, sitting straighter than his years suggested, his hat too big for his head, but worn with determination. Clara saw him from the far side of the corral, and something in the way she stopped walking told Ethan this was a moment that had been traveling a long time. The boy climbed down slowly, holding something wrapped in cloth. He walked toward her without fear, without hesitation, like someone finishing a promise he had carried for years. When he stopped a few feet away, he removed his hat the way he had probably practiced. "Miss Whitmore," he said, voice steady but young. Clara did not trust herself to speak right away. She only nodded gently. The boy held out the cloth bundle. Inside was a small wooden carving of a horse, rough in places, carefully sanded in others, the kind of work done by patient hands learning a hard skill. "You told me once," he said, "that being brave does not mean you are not scared. It just means someone else needs you more." Clara closed her eyes for one brief second, then accepted the carving like it weighed more than gold. "You remembered," she said softly. The boy gave a small smile. "I remember everything." Ethan and the others kept their distance, not out of politeness, but because some debts were private things. The boy climbed back onto the wagon after a few more quiet words and rode away the same way he came, not looking back, because he did not need to anymore. Clara turned the small wooden horse over in her hands before placing it beside the silver locket in her pocket. Two small objects. Two proofs that the cost had been worth it. As the sun slipped behind the horizon and the first evening star appeared above the pasture, Ethan walked beside her along the fence line one last time that day. After a while, he said, "Town will probably change their story about you now." Clara looked out across the land she had helped build back into shape. "That is their story to change," she replied. A long silence followed, comfortable and earned. Then she added quietly, "I never needed them to be right. I only needed to be." Ethan gave a small nod, the kind a man gives when he recognizes something rare. Out on the prairie, the fence post stood straight against the coming night, set deep enough to outlast the weather, just like the quiet truth that had carried her there. And in a place where words often came cheap and reputations came and went like dust, character remained the only thing that stayed when everything else blew away.